She said it on a Tuesday. Not at home, not over the phone. She said it in front of the entire board of Caldwell-Reeve Technologies at the same conference table where I had spent the better part of 30 years building something I believed in. I think it's time we acknowledge that the company has outgrown certain legacy roles. She didn't look at me when she said it. My daughter-in-law, the new CEO, kept her eyes on the slide deck behind her. But everyone in that room knew exactly who she meant. My son, seated 2 chairs down from her, stared at the table. He didn't say a word. I'm 63 years old. I've been in this industry since before some of those board members were born. And I sat there in that leather chair with my name on the door down the hall and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, recognition. I knew this was coming. I just hadn't expected it to be that Tuesday. Let me go back a little, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. I started Caldwell-Reeve in 1994 out of a converted garage in Naperville, Illinois. 2 employees, 1 government contract for infrastructure software, and a belief that mid-sized municipalities deserved the same caliber of technology tools that the big cities had. My wife, God rest her, used to joke that the company was our 3rd child. She wasn't wrong. There were years I gave it more hours than I gave my family, and I'll carry that the rest of my life. My son joined the company 9 years ago, fresh out of his MBA. He was sharp, still is. We disagreed on everything, which is exactly why I wanted him there. He pushed back on my conservatism. I slowed down his impatience. It was a good friction. His wife came in 4 years later. She had a background in enterprise sales and a gift for closing rooms. I respected that immediately. She could walk into a meeting where we were down 20 points and walk out with a signed agreement. I brought her on as VP of Strategic Partnerships, which was the right call at the time. What I didn't account for was how good she was at reading a room I wasn't in. By year 3, she had cultivated relationships with 6 of our 9 board members independently. Lunch meetings I wasn't aware of. Strategy sessions framed as informal check-ins. She understood something I'd underestimated. In a company that size, perception of leadership shifts before the org chart does. The first sign was subtle. Board members started referencing her vision in quarterly meetings. Not her department. Her vision. For the company. My company. I noticed. I didn't react. I thought about it for a long time instead. My older brother had built a machine shop in Indiana and lost controlling interest to a silent partner he trusted completely. He used to say that the moment you stop thinking about your exit, someone else starts thinking about it for you. So about 2 years ago, quietly, I began restructuring. Nothing dramatic, nothing hidden, just careful. I had already established a holding entity years earlier, Caldwell Strategic Holdings, primarily for real estate and equipment leasing within the company's operational structure. The board had approved it without much discussion because it had saved us nearly $400,000 in the first fiscal year through more efficient asset classification. Nobody reads the appendices when the numbers are good. Over the following 18 months, I worked with my attorney to update the licensing agreements attached to our 3 core software platforms. The intellectual property had always been mine personally. I'd developed the foundational architecture before the company was formally incorporated. What changed was the language. Instead of a perpetual royalty-free license from me to the company, the new structure established an annual licensing arrangement through Caldwell Strategic Holdings, reviewed by legal, disclosed to the board in a filing that went out the same week as our record Q2 earnings. Not buried, just not spotlighted. My daughter-in-law, to her credit, is thorough about many things. Contract headers were not among them. Back to that Tuesday. She had presented the board with a transition plan, CEO succession, herself, COO restructuring, my son taking on expanded responsibilities, founder transition, me stepping into what she called a visionary advisory role. No operational authority, no direct reports, a title without a desk. When she finished, she finally looked at me. "We believe this positions the company for its next chapter," she said. The room held. I picked up my coffee cup, took a sip, and set it down carefully. "I appreciate the thought that went into this," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "We'll need to discuss a few structural details first." She blinked. "Of course. We can schedule a transition meeting for next. I mean today," I said, "before this boat moves forward." A board member I'd known for 11 years, a man named Theodore, leaned forward slightly. He was the one who'd helped me secure our first institutional investment. He looked at me the way you look at someone when you're not sure if they're about to cry or about to win. I wasn't going to cry. I opened the folder I'd brought with me. I slid 3 copies across the table, one toward Theodore, one toward our general counsel, one toward the center of the room. I'd ask the board to review the licensing structure for our core platforms before voting on any transition, I said. Specifically, the renewal terms effective the 1st of next year. The general counsel, a careful man named Gordon who'd been with us 8 years, picked up the document. He read the first paragraph. Then he read it again. My daughter-in-law's expression didn't change, but her posture did. Gordon looked up. "These are annual licenses," he said. "They are, held by Caldwell Strategic Holdings, which I control personally, yes." The silence in that room was the kind that happens when smart people are recalculating simultaneously. Theodore set down his pen. "When were these updated?" 18 months ago. Disclosed in the Q2 governance filing. He looked at me for a long moment. "I don't recall that filing." "Most people focused on the earnings that quarter," I said. "We had a good year." My son, to his credit, kept his face entirely neutral. He's always been better at that than he lets on. My daughter-in-law cleared her throat. "This doesn't change the operational rationale for the transition," she said. Her voice was controlled. "She was good. I'll say that again. She was very good." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't. But it does change the conversation about terms." I stood up. "I'm going to step out and let the board review the document. Take whatever time you need." I buttoned my jacket. "Gordon, I'll be in my office when you're ready." I walked out of that conference room and didn't look back. My assistant, a woman named Cecile who had worked with me for 14 years and knew the texture of every kind of silence I was capable of, was at her desk outside my office. She looked up. "How did it go?" "We'll see," I said. "Do you want coffee? I want to sit down first." I went into my office and closed the door. The late morning light came through the window at an angle that made everything look amber. My desk was covered in the ordinary debris of a working day. Folders, a legal pad, 2 printed emails I hadn't gotten to yet. The framed photo of my wife was in its usual spot to the left of my monitor. She was laughing in it. She was always laughing in it. She was always laughing in the ones I chose to keep. I sat down and thought about her for a moment. She used to say that the problem with building something is you forget to decide what it's for. You get so absorbed in the building that the purpose gets swallowed by the process. I'd been thinking about that for 2 years. 20 minutes later, Gordon knocked. He sat across from me with the document in his hand and his reading glasses still on, which he only did when he was thinking hard. "The licensing structure is clean," he said. "Whoever drafted this, my personal attorney." He nodded. "It's clean, and the board filing satisfies disclosure requirements." He paused. "She's going to argue it's a constraint on the company's operational independence. She can argue that, and she won't be entirely wrong." "No," I said, "she won't be entirely wrong." He looked at me carefully. "What do you want, Ray?" Nobody called me Ray at work anymore. I'd been Raymond, or Mr. Caldwell, or founder and CEO for so long that my own first name had started to feel like something from a different era. "I want what's fair," I said, "and I want it in writing." Gordon leaned back. "They'll want to negotiate." That's fine. I've been negotiating longer than my daughter-in-law has been in business. He almost smiled. The platform licenses, if you chose not to renew them, the company would need to rebuild or license from a competitor. I know. That would be 18 months of disruption, minimum, possibly 2 years. I know that too. So you understand what you're holding. I looked at the photo of my wife. I built those platforms in a room in my house before this company had a name. Yes, Gordon, I understand what I'm holding. He was quiet for a moment. What are you asking for? A seat at the table, a real one, not advisory, not emeritus. Voting board member with a defined operational lane that's mine to hold for as long as I choose to be here. And if she says no, then I don't renew the licenses in January, and she can explain to the board why the company's 3 core products no longer function. He stood up. Give me 2 hours. He gave me 3. I spent those 3 hours doing ordinary things. I returned a call from a municipal client in Tucson who wanted to discuss an expansion of our permitting software. I reviewed a contract renewal. I ate a sandwich Cecile brought me without being asked because she knew I'd forgotten to eat. At one point, my son knocked on the door. He came in and sat in the chair across from my desk, the same one Gordon had used, and looked at his hands for a long moment before he looked at me. I didn't know about the licenses, he said. I know you didn't. She didn't tell me she was moving this fast. I looked at him. He was 41 years old, and in that moment he looked the way he had at 19 when he'd wrecked the car and had to come tell me. Not guilty, exactly, caught between loyalties, which is its own kind of misery. I'm not angry at you, I said. Dad, I mean it. You're in a hard position. I understand that. He was quiet. Then, what are you going to do? Protect what I built, I said, the way I should have been more explicit about protecting it a long time ago. He nodded slowly. She's not a bad person. I never said she was. She just wants. I know what she wants, I said. And she's right that the company needs her. She's very good at what she does. That's not the argument. Then what is? I thought about how to say it. The argument is that wanting to lead something and being ready to lead something aren't the same thing yet. And you don't skip the part where you learn the difference by removing the people who already know it. He sat with that. I'll stay out of it, he said finally. That's probably right. He stood up, and for a second he looked like he wanted to say something else, but he just put his hand briefly on my shoulder as he walked past, which is the way men in my family have always said the things they can't put words to. After he left, I sat for a long time watching the city through the window. Gordon came back at 4 o'clock with a legal pad full of notes and an expression that told me the conversation had been hard but productive. She countered, he said. Of course she did. She's proposing a 3-year board seat, non-executive chairman title, and a fixed annual licensing fee that she values at below market rate. What do I think it's worth? He told me the number she'd offered. Double it, I said. Ray. Gordon. He sighed. The board is inclined to support a negotiated outcome. Theodore, in particular. He said, and I'm quoting, that he didn't survive 3 recessions by ignoring contract architecture. I liked Theodore. Tell her the licensing fee is non-negotiable at market rate. The board seat is permanent, not 3 years, and I want it documented that my operational lane includes final approval on any significant modification to the 3 core platforms. She's not going to like that last part. She doesn't have to like it. It limits her authority. It defines mine, I said, which is different. He made notes. At the door he paused. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Did you put this structure in place because you anticipated this specifically? I considered the question honestly. I put it in place because I've been in business long enough to know that nothing stays the way you built it. People change, relationships change, companies change. I wanted to make sure that if the ground shifted, I'd have something solid to stand on. He nodded. That's either wisdom or foresight. Probably both, I said. At my age, they start to look the same. He left. I opened my laptop and began working on something I'd been drafting for 3 weeks. A proposal for a new service tier designed for rural county government systems, underserved markets that nobody in our space had taken seriously. It had nothing to do with any of this. I just needed to think about something that was about building, not defending. An hour later, Cecile knocked. She's asking if you're available. Send her in. My daughter-in-law walked into my office alone. No Gordon, no legal team. She sat down across from me and folded her hands on her knee and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. You planned this, she said. I prepared, I said. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment. The board is going to accept 2 terms. I thought they might. You've put me in a position where I can't lead without your cooperation. I looked at her steadily. You put yourself in a position where you try to restructure someone out of his own company before you'd fully read the architecture of what you were restructuring. I kept my voice even. That's not my doing. Her jaw tightened. I wasn't trying to erase you. What were you trying to do? She paused, looked at the window. Something shifted in her expression, not weakness, but honesty, and those aren't always the same thing. I needed the board to see me as the leader, not as the founder's daughter-in-law who got the job because of the family connection. That landed differently than I expected. I know what they say, she continued. That I married into this. That I didn't earn it. Some of them say that, I admitted. Most of them think it. I looked at her for a long moment. She wasn't wrong. I'd heard it myself, and I hadn't pushed back as hard as I should have. That's on me. Removing me publicly wasn't going to fix that perception, I said. Performing authority isn't the same as having it. She looked like she was about to respond sharply, then didn't. No, she said quietly. I'm starting to understand that. The office was quiet. Outside, the ordinary sounds of a company working, keyboard clicks, a phone ringing down the hall, someone laughing at something near the coffee station. I don't want to be your opponent, I said. I want to retire from this company on my own time, with my name on something I'm proud of, and I want to hand it off to people who are ready to carry it. Are you saying I'm not ready? I'm saying you've got 5 more years of ready ahead of you, and I'm not the obstacle to that. I might be the shortcut. She sat with that for a while. The licensing terms, she said finally. Market rate. Non-negotiable. She nodded. Slowly. The platform approval clause. Stays. The board seat. Permanent. Or until I choose to step back. She took a breath. And in exchange? I stay out of strategic sales. I stay out of marketing. I stay out of HR. My lane is the technology foundation, which is my domain and always has been. And I'll keep building what I'm building. The Rural County Initiative, I raised an eyebrow. Cecile mentioned it, she said. She didn't give me details. She's loyal to you. She's loyal to the work, I said. There's a difference. Something almost like a smile. You really do believe that distinction matters. Every distinction matters, I said. That's what 30 years teaches you. She stood, extended her hand. For the company, she said. I stood and shook it. Her grip was firm, the way it had been the first time I'd met her, at a dinner my son brought her to 8 years ago, when she'd spent the entire meal asking me questions about our permitting software that nobody had ever thought to ask. I'd known then she was exceptional. I still knew it. That was never the question. For the company, I said. After she left, I sat back down. Cecile appeared in the doorway a moment later. The board is meeting to ratify at 5, she said. Okay. She looked at me. You doing all right? I thought about it. Yeah, I think I am. You want that coffee now, please? When she was gone, I opened the photo album on my desktop. Not the corporate archive, my personal folder. There were pictures from 1994 in there. The garage with the folding tables and the extension cords running to 2 desktop computers. Back when the only people who believed in this thing were my wife and a municipal manager in Rockford who'd taken a chance on an unknown vendor. I looked at those pictures for a while. Not out of nostalgia, out of something closer to accounting. Here is where it started. Here is what it cost. Here is what it became. The announcement went out company-wide 2 days later. Careful language, as these things always are. Founder Raymond Caldwell transitions to executive board chairman. Leadership structure evolves to support next phase of growth. The company remains committed to the values that have guided it for 3 decades. My phone didn't stop for most of that morning. Former colleagues, clients, a few competitors pretending to check in. My daughter-in-law sent a brief professional note expressing confidence in the path forward. My son texted something shorter and more honest. Glad it worked out. Love you, Dad. I read that one twice. That afternoon I drove to the cemetery. I don't do it as often as I should, which is something I've made peace with imperfectly. I sat with my wife for a while and told her what had happened. The way I used to tell her things at the end of a hard day when we were young. And the garage was the office, and she'd bring me coffee at 11 at night and sit on the workbench and listen. She would have had thoughts. She always had thoughts. She probably would have told me I could have handled it with less drama, which might have been true. And then she would have said she was proud of me, which would have made everything else irrelevant. I drove home and made dinner. Nothing special. Pasta. A glass of red wine. The Cubs game on low in the background. By the end of that first month, the Rural County Initiative had preliminary interest from 3 counties in central Illinois and 1 in southern Ohio. Gordon was drafting the licensing framework. Cecile was building the client contact database. A technology director I'd mentored years ago at a state agency, a man named Alston, who'd since built serious credentials in municipal infrastructure, had agreed to consult on the pilot. Marshall Advisory had become something. My company was becoming something different. The 2 things were not in conflict. 6 months in, my daughter-in-law and I had found a working rhythm. It wasn't warm. It wasn't personal. It was functional and honest, which at this stage of life I'll take over, performed closeness any day. She led strategy. She led sales. She built the partnerships she was gifted at building. I held the foundation. At a board meeting in October, Theodore caught me in the hall afterward and fell into step beside me. You know, he said, most founders, when this happens, either burn it down or fold completely. I know, you did neither. I didn't see the point in either. He nodded. What made the difference? I thought about it honestly. I stopped thinking of it as mine, I said. The company isn't mine. It never really was. It belongs to the work. My job was to make sure the work could continue on terms I could live with. He thought about that. And can you? Yeah, I said. I can. The last call I'll tell you about came on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. My daughter-in-law called me directly, which she almost never did. I want to ask you something, she said, without preamble. Go ahead. The Rural County Platform. We want to fold it into the company's product roadmap. Full integration. It would mean significant investment and the right kind of press. I was quiet for a moment. What are the terms? I asked. Co-developed. Your name on the architecture. Full attribution. And the IP. Shared. 50-50. Through a joint structure we both control. I looked out the window. The November light was thin and flat and honest. Send me the draft, I said. There was a beat of silence. You're not going to make this difficult. I'm going to make sure it's right, I said. That's different. When the call ended, I sat for a long time at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel relieved. I felt something closer to what I imagine a structural engineer feels when a load-bearing wall holds up under stress that nobody planned for. Not triumph, confirmation. I built it to hold, and it held. If you've ever been the person in the background, the one who did the work while someone else took the room, the one who kept things standing while others took credit for the standing, you know this feeling. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need applause. It just settles into your chest on an ordinary Thursday morning while the coffee goes cold and the November light comes through the window, and you realize that what you built was never really for anyone else's approval. It was for you, and it lasted. I've been thinking about what my wife used to say, that the problem with building something is you forget to decide what it's for. I forgot that for a long time. I got so deep into the work, the contracts, the clients, the quarterly numbers, the constant forward motion, that I stopped asking the harder question underneath all of it. Not, what am I building, but who am I building it for, and what happens to me when the building is done? When my daughter-in-law stood at that conference table and called my role a legacy position, she wasn't entirely wrong. That's what stung most. Not the word, but the fact that I'd let it become true without deciding to. I had drifted into irrelevance by inertia. And inertia is just what neglect looks like when you dress it up in busyness. What she didn't know, what I hadn't been careful enough to make visible, was that I had spent 2 years quietly correcting that drift, not out of suspicion, not out of strategy in the cold, calculated sense, out of something closer to self-respect. I was 63 years old, and I had built something real, and I was not willing to walk away from it on someone else's timeline without a foundation under my feet. The licensing structure I built through Caldwell Strategic Holdings wasn't a trap. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't designed to punish anyone. It was designed to ensure that if the ground shifted, and ground always shifts, in business, in families, in everything, I would have something solid to stand on. That's not cunning. That's what it looks like when a person takes their own future seriously. What I've come to understand, sitting with this for these months, is that the choices we make quietly are the ones that define us loudly later. I didn't make a speech in that boardroom. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I slid 3 copies of a document across a table and let the work speak. And the work spoke because I had done it honestly, years before I needed it, with no guarantee that I ever would. That's the part that matters, not the outcome. The doing of it before the outcome was visible. Theodore said afterward that most founders either burn it down or fold completely when this happens. I didn't do either, not because I was calm, but because I had prepared myself to have options. Options are not luck. Options are what you get when you keep making small, unglamorous, careful decisions over a long period of time, when nobody is watching and nothing is urgent. My daughter-in-law is good at her work. She'll be better at it in 5 years than she is now, and she's already formidable. I don't hold what she did against her. I understand it. She was trying to prove something to a room full of people who doubted her, and she reached for the wrong tool. That happens. What matters is what comes after, whether a person can look at what they've done clearly and adjust. She adjusted, and so did I. I still go into the office twice a week. The rural county initiative is expanding into a 4th state. Cecile still brings me coffee before I think to ask. Gordon still reads documents twice before he says anything. Some things hold. The ones worth holding usually do.